Under an executive order issued by President Donald Trump, the National Park Service is planning to remove mentions of slavery from the President's House exhibit at Independence National Historic Park, which is on 6th and Market Streets. It's part of an effort to remove material that, quote, inappropriately disparages Americans. In short, it's erasing history. Slated for removal are the names of 9 enslaved people who worked and lived at this site that was once home to President George Washington. I'm sitting down with Reverend Mark Kelly Tyler, who preserves the history of the Global African Methodist Church. Until last year, he was the pastor at Mother Bethel AME Church, just a few blocks away. We talk about what these possible changes say about the nation and its reckoning with slavery, especially in the city that birthed the nation. It's Tuesday, September 23rd. I'm Trenae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Reverend Mark Kelly Tyler, when did you hear about these efforts by the Trump administration to get rid of the slavery exhibits at Independence National Historic Park? What was your reaction? How did you feel?
Well, I'll tell you, I guess if you've been just kind of following the news, this was a foregone conclusion for me early in the year that we were going to arrive at this point. If you listen to the things the president had been saying and watching the things that he'd been doing, that there's no surprise. So I guess it was during the summer that we all heard about the executive order to go back and re-examine everything, including gift shops and things that they even sell in all of the sites that are controlled by the federal government. And so again, this, should anybody be surprised that this is like right in the crosshairs of this executive order? It is, after all, the first president of the United States, his home. George Washington lived there. There's people talk about that all the time. George Washington slept here. George Washington ate here. He actually lived there, he and Martha. And by the way, 9 enslaved people from their very large plantation in Virginia that were cycled in and cycled out. I'm not surprised that this would become a big issue for him. And I will have to say that I'm pretty disheartened to think about the fact that somehow all of the hard work of activists who weren't believed in the very beginning, over 20 years ago, when Michael Corden led the effort to have that place honor the enslaved people, that all of that effort, all of the architects, all of the project managers and the Park Service people, for that matter, that could just be wiped away in just a moment. To me, it re-traumatizes the same people again.
I have similar feelings, and I want to address that in just a moment. What's the latest on all of this? Do we know exactly what will be removed and from where and when?
So no one knows anything definitive yet. Not a timeline, not, is it going to be everything? Will it be draped over? Will it be covered or just simply gone? But that's also a part of the way that this administration has been going about things, that you just wake up in the morning and it is gone or it's just covered up. I would suspect that anything that has to do with the harshness of slavery will be taken away, as he's kind of on this, I only want good news. He only wants good job numbers. He only wants good news stories. He only wants comedians on the air who tell good jokes about him. So obviously he only wants good news about slavery. And from the perspective of a descendant of enslaved people, I don't know where you find good news stories. Slavery, in the words of Bishop Richard Allen, who, the founder of the AME Church, Bishop Allen had been enslaved. And he wrote in his own autobiography that slavery is a bitter pill. And that, he said, he was a person who considered himself to have a relatively, quote unquote, good owner. And yet it was still a bitter pill not being able to be free. So imagine what folk who came from Virginia must have felt like.
Absolutely. Reverend Tyler, please help me to understand the justification here, right? Why is the Trump administration erasing years of research and advocacy? We're talking about Americans here, Black Americans who were not only enslaved and survived the terrors of slavery, but who were the very people who built this nation through their sweat and tears. What is the justification here?
Yeah, I don't know that there is a good justification. I mean, I understand. Listen, I mean, and I think we can all understand that you want balance in looking back. That there are things about life in our own personal histories, our family histories, our institutional histories that are good and bad. And so, but it feels like he wants to swing the pendulum so far to the extreme that it really just erases what slavery was. That yes, I mean, I guess anybody can make an argument that there were, some good things. And I use that very, very lightly, that, that came out of the experience. But it pales in comparison. There's no one who could try to make the argument that somehow slavery itself was good. He has people who work in the administration, who have actually, and people who are supporting Project 2025, who through their own research have tried to make the argument that we're missing out on all the good that slavery produced. But again, from the persons who have had narratives handed down to us from family members, I mean, I don't have to go so far back to find family members who were born before 1865. I can trace them back to Virginia when they left immediately after emancipation and went to Arkansas, which was kind of the Wild West back then, for a new start. These are not strangers to us. These are family members with names who live this. And so we understand that, yeah, we wouldn't be here talking, I guess, if not for slavery, and as though somehow we wouldn't have a wonderful life somewhere else. So I just, it's just hard to understand the thinking here. It's hard to understand how anybody could be so callous and so insensitive and lack empathy to know how triggering it is to say, I'm tired of talking about the bad stuff of slavery. Well, we can't relitigate history. We can't change the past, but we can change the future. And that's why these exhibits are important, so that we don't keep making the same mistakes again. And that is quite honestly my fear, that if you make slavery and reduce it down to what some people have in new textbooks for K through 12 as forced migration, as opposed to what it was, then we'll find ourselves going back through these same dangerous roads again.
As the former leader of one of the first religious institutions for freed Black Americans, what do you tell people in church, right? What do you tell Philadelphians to do at a moment like this?
Well, I mean, so my new role is actually as historiographer of the AME Church. I now do what I did at Mother Bethel. So at Mother Bethel, I was, also the head of the museum there at the church and the archive. And so a large part of my job was to curate the history of that congregation, which gave birth to a denomination that's now in 39 countries on 5 continents. So my new role is to do that exact same thing, but now for the entire AME Church. And I get that question all the time from people. It's what do we do in this moment? I mean, who thought when I ran for this position that history would be, our history would be such an important story in this current administration? And what I've been trying to say to people is, number one, that we really have to begin to steward our own historical assets. For example, I was at Brown versus Board of Education Museum in Topeka, Kansas. Oliver Brown was an AME preacher. And when you think about the Brown versus Board case, 3 of the 5 cases that became that Supreme Court decision had AMEs front and center. Briggs versus Elliott in South Carolina, the case in Delaware with Lewis Redding, who was an AME attorney in Delaware. So we thought all these years that we could give our things to the federal government. The National Park Service is nonpartisan. They'll be safe there. They have more resources. And so, sure enough, all of our things are there when it relates to Brown versus Board of Education. Not everything, but a great deal of things are there. Same thing with the President's House and the Smithsonian. As pastor Mother Bethel, we sent 2 artifacts to the Smithsonian African American Museum, again, believing that they were safe. I think we now know that you cannot simply assume that anymore. So it's incumbent upon us to begin to put resources aside and find physical buildings where we can curate our own exhibits to talk about what our church and our role has been in the founding of this nation and how that is extended outside of the country as well. and then also to have a place where we can hold archival information as well. We just simply can't trust all institutions anymore like we thought, because history has now become a part of the big political fight in this country.
Well, what happens to those artifacts? Like you mentioned, do they get put away? Do they get returned back to you all?
I mean, listen, so this is you asked earlier, like what's happening with the president's house. One is legally, we don't know the answer. Like that exhibit, does that belong to the city of Philadelphia? Or was it just simply gifted to the National Park Service until they didn't want it anymore? Can we
I
take
see.
that back? If they don't want it, can we have it and place it somewhere else in Philadelphia? Or do they have the right to just simply throw it in the trash? I mean, we don't know. Now, in the Smithsonian, my guess is that many people did what Mother Bethel did when I was there, which is to loan the artifacts there for a long period of time, and you have the right to take them back. We loaned artifacts to other places as well. So I'm hoping that's the case. But I mean, what a great tragedy. I mean, all the work Lonnie Bunch did in the African American Museum at the Smithsonian, all those years under presidents like George Bush, it was absolutely bipartisan. To think that people might now have to go back, that the family of Emmett Till may have to go back and get the casket, that, all of these places that have sent things there may have to take them back. And if we do, what do we do with them? So I think it depends on the site and it depends on the donor, how they actually gave it. But in some of these cases, I'm certain that they signed their rights over, believing that they'd be safe there.
I want to talk about the 9 people enslaved by George Washington at the president's house in Philadelphia were Maul, Christopher, Hercules, Richmond, Ona, Austin, Gills, Paris, and Joe. And I know we might not be able to address everyone's life, but what do we know about some of their lives?
Well, I'll just talk about two that I think are the most well known. And for one, I would say to people who are listening to this interview that you should go and check out the book Never Caught by Erica Armstrong Dunbar, great scholar here in the city.
And that was a book about Ona Judge, who was one of the enslaved women at
Yeah,
the president's house.
who stole her freedom. Think about that from the Washingtons. She got away, and we believe that while there's no evidence because they didn't talk about how they got away smartly, they didn't want to get in, incriminate anyone in Philadelphia. But you have to believe that they were having interactions with free Black people. Richard Allen, for example, had a chimney sweep business. He was an entrepreneur. So while he was running the church, the first building went up in 1794. George Washington was still there at that same time. So Allen, his chimney sweep business and his apprentices went in and cleaned the chimneys of the house we're talking about. So you've got free people coming in and out of the house, whether, all of the 9 of them were able to go around Philadelphia or not, like the famous chef Hercules. They were coming in contact with free Black people. And so we believe that was a strong connection in helping Oni Judge find her way to freedom. She stole herself, made herself free. And I mean, I love the story as told by Erica because, George Washington is so embarrassed by it that they find out where she is. She's not in hiding, but she's up north. And they send an emissary to try to convince her to come back. It's almost like, hey, listen, the Washingtons feel terrible about this whole thing. Just come back and then they'll set you free. And I always say, Oni says, look, I was born at night, but not last night. No, thank you. And she never goes back, obviously. Hercules, who was, again, just a world famous chef. People loved to come to the Washingtons' home in part because of his cooking. He was able to sell his food after work, and that's how he became pretty wealthy. They said he was one of the best dressed Black persons in the city of Philadelphia. So you could just kind of imagine him just kind of, strutting around Old City. And one day he just had enough and he left and went away. And we don't know anything about what happened to him. And so their lives are very well documented. And but again, I think the 9 are representative because these are the 9 names that were chosen for this wall. I wasn't a researcher on this project, but from what I remember, that they were cycled in and out throughout the Washington's presidency. Because remember, at 6 months, if you were in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, you would be set free. So they'd have to reset this clock by taking them back into slave territory and then bringing them back in, circumventing a loophole in the law as the president of the United States.
And that right there is something. We'll take a quick break, but when we come back, I'm curious to understand how this is all playing out in Philly, especially with America's 250th birthday celebrations next year. More on that after the break. Reverend Tyler, tell me about the effort several years ago to make sure that these names and stories were memorialized at the president's house, right down the block from the Liberty Bell, the birthplace of American democracy. What was that fight?
In 2004, I was sent to a church right across the river, the oldest Black church in Camden. So I was at Macedonia AME until November of 2008. And on that side of the river, obviously, you're kind of caught up in Philadelphia's world. So I remember hearing about the excavation, this public debate. So the first fight was to get the Park Service to acknowledge that this happened. One of the big issues is that they denied that the Washingtons even did this, that they brought enslaved people. And so once they were able to prove that and demonstrate that, and then at that point, everything else, kind of began to fall into place, but they had to fight to get the acknowledgement. I think, Michael Cord could probably tell you much better than I could about, the fight about getting those particular names up or why they even settled on those 9 names. But just as a person who was on the outside looking in, across the river, we were all cheering for Philly. And then who knew that I would come in as the pastor in November 2008. I think they were just about ready to open the exhibit because one of the first things I was invited to was as a community member and a person they knew that had a little bit of knowledge of these stories, especially Richard Allen. They wanted me to look at the panels and kind of see what they were getting ready to go public with and offer some opinion and, just kind of weigh in.
Before all of this research, had you heard any of these names or that enslaved people were even at the president's house?
No, I went to school in America like everyone else, and I heard that he cut down a cherry tree, never told a lie, and had wooden teeth. I heard the same stories that everybody else heard. That's what my concern is about the stories that will be told going forward. This is beyond erasure. This is more than just simply whitewashing. This is talking about playing with the facts now and rewriting stories and rewriting the history. And so our job, I think, as people who love history is to always tell a more complete story. That's what I try to do. And so who are these unnamed heroes and heroines who we don't know about? Everybody knows Richard Allen, if you've kind of followed Black history, but he didn't do it by himself. So who are the other people? Who are the other names that we need to know? And likewise, look, we don't want to just know the good, but we want to know the bad and the ugly because that's all history. It's all important and all of it needs to be acknowledged.
There's an issue of trust here that I'm thinking about. And then I'm thinking also about the fact that America is celebrating the semi-quincentennial next year, the 250th anniversary of the nation being built. What does altering history or not mentioning slavery mean in Philadelphia with this backdrop?
Yeah, I think it would just be a tragedy. And it's also a missed opportunity, right? Because there's one way that you can look at this. The person who just wants to just only show the good, right? That's obviously where the president is right now. He said it. He said as much as this, like repeatedly. But if I had a chance to talk to him, first of all, I would sit down and say, let's take a tour. I want to walk you through like some of these sites and let's talk about these stories so that maybe you can understand better and appreciate what it is we're trying to say. Because if you really get down to it, it really speaks to what makes America great after all, which is that it can, that when it stumbles, it somehow finds its way, right? That in that house where George Washington lived and held enslaved people, he also was having conversations about a free nation with framers and signers of the Declaration, members of Congress, members of his cabinet were there. And in the same house, we had slavery side by side with people who were desiring to be free. And the people desiring to be free who were working on this big American project had a major blind spot. And it was right in front of them. I mean, like literally it's right in front of you. How do you not see this?
It's the irony of the whole American story.
That's exactly right. And yet, it would take another 80 years to get that part reconciled and a great deal of blood in the process. And then it finally gets it right. And for about 11 years, the country begins to move in a way that is more equitable. And then Reconstruction ends, and we're right back where we were now in pseudo slavery for almost another 100 years under Jim Crow. And then finally it gets, so this is about becoming a more perfect union. We're not there. But if you look at the history says that we are moving and trending, slow though it may be, in the right direction. And so that's how I would look at it, and not see these things that are ugly from the past as something to be hidden, but instead to be brought out and to celebrate that we made it beyond this.
We've got more on this after the break. Reverend Tyler, what plans do you all have to try to preserve the history of slavery as this removal or dismissal of history is happening? I know Visit Philly had announced that they would find another location for this history, for the artifacts.
I would say that right now, we really have to see what's going to happen. We just really need to see if this is going to be as devastating as we believe, or when we look at it, it's all just like, as they say, a big nothing burger, and the exhibit is pretty much still the way that it is. But it has certainly given many of us pause and to begin to think about different ways of telling the story. What I will say is this, while there's nothing concrete laid out yet, that one thing that everyone that I've spoken to is absolutely committed to is to making sure that the story does not go away. And that in Philadelphia, when people come and they want to learn about the Liberty Bell, they want to see the room where the signers of the Declaration met, they want to see the home where Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, they want to see where these folk all went to church, that they are also going to know that slavery existed in this city. And we want people to walk away, having dispelled that myth that most of us grew up with, which was that slavery was simply a Southern thing, that it didn't happen in the North. Yes, slavery happened in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey and in New York and everywhere else, and it was abolished slowly. And, then it was abolished in the South after a war, but it existed almost everywhere at the very beginning. And that's a story in and of itself, one that corrects something that most of us get wrong, because we've been taught that from the time that we were very small, that, that never happened up here. Not so.
What does this mean for healing? Like, since slavery, there have been great people and movements that have tried to heal this country from these devastating practices. What do you suggest that we tell our children about what is happening right now? How do we explain all of this?
Well, so it's interesting you asked that question because, all four of my children now are in their 20s, early 20s to late 20s. And, I remember when they were kind of coming up thinking like, well, like, how do you tell them these stories? It was easy for me. My mother grew up in Arkansas. She was born in 1933. And so she grew up in the very heart of Jim Crow. And so she always, reminded us of these stories. And she's still alive at 91 years old. Wow. And so I remember, our kids were in mixed schools, and it's like, when do you kind of begin to tell them this? Because you don't want to put too much on them. They need to kind of understand this on their own. Mm-hmm. And so as they were growing, I could kind of recall sometimes some pushback, like, oh, that's not how it is. The world's not like that. That's the old times. You guys need to get out of that. And, then Trayvon Martin happened. And after Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown and Sandra Bland, and so many stories that started to cascade. that kind of seemingly started with Trayvon Martin. We know it didn't start there, but for them, that was kind of their great awakening. And then George Floyd and everything else. And so each of those moments opened up an opportunity for us to explain deeper about the way that the world is and why there are people who look at you and believe that you're not qualified just because of the color of your skin, who believe that you were here only because of affirmative action or DEI, and that you've taken some white person's job. So we have to explain that. That doesn't just come out of nowhere, out of thin air. It comes from a deeply rooted history. And so each of those moments made that opportunity possible. And this moment now also makes it possible. Listen, if you're talking about what I tell my kids, I think we need to tell all of our children that there have been history books in this country from the very beginning. You look at some of the textbooks from the early 1900s talking about slavery. They talk about slaves being happy and docile, and they show pictures and drawings of enslaved people with fiddles and dancing and partying and having a good time on the plantation. And that became a dominant image for many white Americans about what slavery is. So that when you have people show up today saying, oh, slavery wasn't that bad, it's easy for people to believe if that's the only thing that you've been told and it's been handed down to you from your parents, their parents, and so on, right? So for me, trying to help my children and other young people understand how people could view us in this way, it's like they've been miseducated. They've been lied to. And so, we also have a duty to try to help educate the rest of the world as well, where they got this bad information from. So it's not just simply remembering for our sake, but it's also helping other people remember so that we all appreciate better what this country actually is versus the myths that we're often told.
Reverend Mark Kelly Tyler, thank you so much for joining me today on CityCast Philly.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. And listen, I'm always optimistic. I believe that when a door closes, then a window opens somewhere else. And that, remember, everybody, we didn't always have National Park Service sites to tell our stories. There was a museum in Mother Bethel going all the way back to the early 1900s. And if it means going back into our church basements and everywhere else, we're going to keep telling our stories. So let's keep fighting.
That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Let us know what you think of this episode and share this with a friend. Rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. And don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Philly neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.